Critical Blast, where pop culture gets blasted.
And good evening, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, coming to you once again from the Critical Blast Caverns, where we will be talking not about crowdfunding comics and not about independent movies, but we are going to delve into that much overlooked lately genre of literature known as men's adventure, sometimes called pulp heroes. And who better to discuss that than the most prolific pulp hero writer out there today, Mr. Will Murray. Will, how are you tonight?
I'm doing fine, RJ. Thank you for having me.
I ran into your name many times and did not realize I ran into it. I actually, began to know you a little bit more as we talked in the Destroyer group, and people were tossing around your name for some of the books that you'd ghostwritten. And then I just did a stream several months ago where we were talking about short story anthologies, and I was pulling out these greatest Batman stories ever told, greatest Catwoman stories, and every single anthology I own, there's a story in there by Will Murray. So I have quite a bit of your work. I just never zeroed in on the fact that I collected so much of it.
Well, I missed part of what you said because you turned robotic for a minute.
Oh, no.
I've contributed to a lot of anthologies over the years, and I was lucky enough to be invited to contribute to the Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman anthologies Bantam Books was doing when I was doing Doc Savage for Bantam Books. So those were some of my first, I think, anthology appearances, certainly with recurring characters.
Is that the best way to get invited to an anthology, is to be working on something for the publisher already?
I don't know that always applies, and that was 30 years ago, so I don't know that it would apply today, but it certainly was a lucky break for me because I got to write Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman in a fairly tight time frame, a year or so, and I really liked doing that. It was a lot of fun, and I like the idea of taking comic book characters and trying to give them an extra dimension in short stories and novels without necessarily bending them out of shape or making them too real.
Yeah, you can do so much more, so much differently with the novel form than you can with the comic book form. I love the comic book form. There are things you can do with it that you can only do with a comic book form, but you can really dig into the character, do a character study better with the prose. So how'd you break into this business, Will?
Oh, I don't remember. It's been so long. I think it was, I entered the world of being published through fanzines, like a lot of people, and developed a reputation in terms of my interest in Doc Savage and The Shadow in pulp magazines. I published a book on The Shadow 40 years ago this year, which, brought me to certain people's attention. And it was a slow roll. I might have gone about it smarter, but, one thing did lead to another, and some things, branched off in other directions. But I would say that I just sort of stumbled backwards into a whole bunch of opportunities over a long horizon. And there isn't one door I went through. There were many.
Just kept plugging at it and being in the right place and ready to go. Has it always been in sort of the pulp hero kind of storytelling? Is there a reason that you've been drawn to that?
Yeah, because I love that stuff. I read that stuff, and I want to write that stuff. And there isn't much else that I really want to write or read outside of that stuff. I mean, my tastes are still, as an author and a consumer, pretty much at the 15-year-old mark that I was when I bought my first Doc Savage and Conqueror of Mars books and read Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV novelizations.
Now, a lot of the pulp heroes, of course, they were set in the 40s, maybe early 50s. I'm not sure where it cuts off. Do they translate well into modern era, or do they work best in that long forgotten time, I guess?
I think, like Sherlock Holmes, you want to tell the stories of Doc Savage and the Shadow primarily in their original time period, which was the Great Depression into the 1940s. But, certain characters are timeless. Tarzan is timeless. If you keep him in the jungle, it doesn't matter what year it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, in fact, in the Destroyer, although, I did it for a long time, it started a long time ago now, and an argument could be made that Destroyers should stay in the 70s, 80s, not maybe 90s, just because of certain practicalities, but also you can keep the tone to that world, that time. It's just that, when you have an ongoing series, you always move forward in time. You never say, we're going to freeze everything in 1999.
Right.
But in retrospect, if I were to write a story today, I would be more tempted, if I had the latitude to do so, I would be more tempted to set it back in maybe the 90s or even earlier, and just kind of play with that world, because it's long enough ago enough now that you can say, well, that was a distinctly different time.
Yeah, and what Warren did that first book it published in 71. He wrote it in 68, 69 with Richard Sapir.
63.
63, that long ago. I thought it was just a couple of years they sat on, but yeah, that was
almost
a long time. But yeah, you're right. I mean, one of the challenges that I have now writing the series in modern day, first of all, it's hard to write a satire when reality is just so batshit crazy now.
Yep.
That you can't parody this stuff because it'll be a headline tomorrow. But yeah, many of the tropes that were written around the Destroyer, such as, he wouldn't bother to memorize the phone number. So Smitty just, made the phone number for Cure 1-111-111-1111.
That was my idea.
That was your idea? That was a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Now it's like, I changed that because the time's changing in Bully Pulpit, where he's got the phone that he has to carry, and he hates the thing. He's like looking for buttons to press, and he's like, how do I get this thing to dial Smitty? And the thing says, dialing Smitty. He's like, well, why didn't you just say that in the first place? But and then you get people saying, oh, look, Remo's using a smartphone. I'm like, well, no, he's just stumbling his way around it. But you if you want to keep moving forward, you can't keep him in phone booth era world.
I remember we got to a place in the series, and I don't remember what book, where I realized that time had passed so far from the original setup of Cure that for Smitty to have a concealable desk monitor is actually more suspicious than if he just had a monitor on his desk like everybody else.
Yeah.
So I talked to a computer expert, and I said, I want you to give me the most sophisticated concealable idea I can that wouldn't be coming up out of a trap door, because I'll have a real monitor on his desk like everybody else, but the real Cure monitor is concealed. And he gave me this whole system, and what the concealed part was under I think dark glass on his desktop is the keyboard and the other things, and he could access them, maybe by touch. And so he still had a concealed Cure computer, but he also had a monitor that stayed in place. And that was just staying up with the times, but keeping the secrecy factor and the intrigue of that still in place.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know if they've kept that or not. I don't know what it's like now.
Well, I've kept it because I've used it before. The whole thing where it's canted underneath the glass top, and it's just kind of like you can only see it straight on.
Yep.
So yeah, that was also very, very ingenious. I think you can take a character like the Destroyer and make the setting modern. I think where it starts to fall apart is when you have fans saying like, "Yes, now Remo is now 75 years old." I'm like, well, no, we don't do that. As soon as you tie to a concrete
he's actually older, because although the first novel made him a Vietnam vet, when they wrote the first story in '63, he was a Korean vet. They updated it when they got around to publishing it.
Yep, they had to keep doing it. They're eventually probably going to make him, well, I just checked this because somebody made me look it up. he was a Vietnam vet and created the destroyer.
Yep.
That's where Khan found him in Vietnam. But they'll probably make him, like an Iraq war vet at some point, because you just can't have him being that old.
Well, or you could just ignore that part of it. Just don't tell that part of the origin. That's what they did with Doc Savage. Doc Savage was a World War I veteran, but by about 1936, they realized, well, he's getting a little bit older, and we want him to be young, so they just stopped mentioning it. So that's one way to go about it. Just don't mention it. He was a Marine. That was it.
That's all they needed. Smith being OSS is, another one of those.
That's a problem.
Things.
But Smith can be 120. It doesn't matter. He could be in a wheelchair. He was what Dick used to call a Greek chorus. He didn't have to go out into the field. He didn't have to be physically active. He just was a brain and a voice and a point of view. So he can be as old as he can be 120, 130, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, Chun's the only one where it's funny for him to be. Is he 200? Is he 300 years old? My God, how old is this guy? Because it adds to his character and his mystique. But we should quit trying to age Remo. But there are other pulp heroes here that you have worked on, and one of them you sent me the cover to here is this Tarzan, the Conqueror of Mars. So we got it's a Tarzan and John Carter, both of them Edgar Rice Burroughs creations. A crossover. Is this the first time? I don't think this is the first time that these two characters have met up, is it?
Well, I would love to know what you just said, but the entire thing was computer.
Oh, no.
But try to ask the question that you must have ended that with.
Is this the first time that Tarzan and John Carter met up?
Sorry, I'm not getting you.
Oh, no.
Here we go. I just heard, oh, no.
Okay, better.
Okay, now you're back.
Yeah, okay. Is this the first time that Tarzan and John Carter have met up? They're both Burroughs properties.
In my series of books, the Wild Adventures series, which includes Tarzan and Doc Savage and now John Carter, yes. But there have been a couple attempts before. A writer did a mega epic novel a few years ago where Tarzan, John Carter, and all of the Burroughs characters and many others, got together for a big war on Mars. And someone tried it in the 50s, but never finished the manuscript and it wasn't published. So I'm the first guy to do the meeting without any extraneous characters or licenses.
All right. Now this is the Wild Adventures of Edgar Rice Burroughs series. Is Tarzan the main protagonist of this series, or do you jump around in the universe?
I launched this through my own, Wild Adventures books for Altus Press, and we did Tarzan, then we did King Kong meets Tarzan, and now we've done John Carter. But since then, or during that evolution of the last 7 years approximately, the Burroughs people have launched their own book series, and I let them use the Wild Adventures of Edgar Rice Burroughs brand, which is what I created for my books. And so in their publishing, they have other characters they've been doing. Pellucidar Books, I think they're just about to release a John Carter standalone of some kind. So the Wild Adventures that I do is basically Tarzan meets or Tarzan alone. The Wild Adventures they do is whatever characters they own and whatever combinations they do. And they separately have this Edgar Rice Burroughs Universe line of books, which are a much more elaborate updating of the characters with, crossover stories and interconnected stories.
Now Kong's not
up again.
King Kong is not Burroughs, is he?
Can't hear you.
Oh boy. How about now? I feel like I'm in that Sprint commercial. Now?
Nope.
Still no. Hang on one second. I want to do something. Sure. Sometimes that works.
Nope.
Still no.
Let me talk a little bit because your voice comes back, but it just comes back at odd intervals.
Here's what we've got.
I've done
what
3 times.
We've got here is failure to communicate.
Standalone, a King Kong versus Tarzan, which is really a piece of the original Tarzan story, I mean, original King Kong story. It's the story of how they got Kong off the island and into New York. They end up going by way of Africa, and the boat runs aground, and Kong escapes, and Tarzan is enlisted to help everybody get the damn monkey back on the boat. And then we came up with Conqueror of Mars, which is a Tarzan John Carter crossover. And the premise of that is Tarzan finds himself translated to Mars just as John Carter was. And he has to figure out where he is, what everything is going on here. And he wants to get home. And this is about him trying to get home and figure out how to survive on Mars. And finally encountering John Carter, and they find themselves at odds because they're at cross purposes over Tarzan's appearance on Mars, because Tarzan now leads a tribe of great white apes, and nothing like that has ever been seen on Mars. And so John Carter sees Tarzan as a threat, doesn't know he's from Earth. And Tarzan also acquires a pack of green Martians, so he's wielding the more barbaric tribes of Mars into an army, and he's just using it to get home. But he's also tramping all over Mars, and it looks like a big threat. And that's the premise of that book.
Tarzan taking the leadership of the great white apes, that's a natural fit.
Yeah, natural.
That's just perfect. I was asking earlier about the Kong crossover. Kong is not Burroughs, is it?
No, Kong is Marion C. Cooper's estate. Owns King Kong, owns certain rights to King Kong. Other rights are owned by other parties. And my cover artist, Joe DeVito, who does most of my covers, has Kong rights. So when we were talking about doing the 80th anniversary of Doc Savage in 2013, we were talking one day and said, what are we going to do? We want to do something special. I says, we can do Doc Savage meets King Kong. I can get you those rights. And we, it took a lot of effort and approvals from all the parties, but we did it, and it turned out to be one of my most successful books, and one of my most interesting books, because we look at Doc Savage when he's a young man just coming off of World War I, and he's got enlisted by his father to find his grandfather who's missing in the Indian Ocean, and that leads him to Skull Island and King Kong.
And I've got the cover to that pulled up here. This is I was going to say, you must have a wonderful team of lawyers who specialize in copyright and licensing.
Well, what it is all the lawyers who own the properties simply get together and hash it out. So
one of the things that always got me about Doc Savage, and this is going to be silly, is that hair.
Well, that's a modification of what Lester Dent described. He said it was smooth and like a skull cap. Artist James Baumer, when he reinterpreted them for Bantam books in '64, added the widow's peak. That's a little bit of an extreme widow's peak, but different artists give it a different flair. And in the books, Lester Dent described that sometimes Doc wore a metal skull cap that looked like his hair, that was bulletproof and blackjack proof. So we just say that's kind of Doc's helmet hair. Yeah.
Now it looks natural on your Skull Island cover here. It was this one here where it's like, yeah, that's growing on the forehead kind of thing.
That's extreme, but sometimes that's what we do. Well, the ripped shirt is just the hair in the ripped shirt. They're symbols. They're not meant to be taken entirely literally.
And you can't. I know that DC Comics for a while tried to do. I say for a while. My God, was the '80s really that long ago? They did the comic book series, and it was modern day. And I'm like, I missed Doc Savage was the what was he? The knight of the running board. He would always stand on the outside of the car.
Yep.
And cars had running boards, and he would stand on that, and he'd be shooting the gun. It doesn't work today.
No.
Same with the Shadow, the whole pneumatic tube system that character used to communicate with all his partners. It's like you would email now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most of the Shadow's apparatus is just hopelessly outdated.
So I wonder if.
But I will say that Condé Nast has worked a deal with bestseller James Patterson. They're going to release a new Shadow novel in July. That's going to be an updated version of the character. I shouldn't say that. It's going to be the same character brought into our time. So we're going to have to see how he adapts, what tools he uses, and what he discards. I'm very interested in seeing what they do with it, because the Shadow has to be updated to survive in the 21st century. His ways don't work in a world of electronic devices and sensors and whatever. He's going to have to up his game. Yeah,
Jedi mind tricks and a tiger eye opal ring are not going to be enough. So now, one of the characters that you've sent me several of the covers on here that you're working on is the Spider, and a lot of people, they'll know Doc Savage, they'll know the Shadow, they'll know Tarzan for sure. The Spider's kind of lesser known,
but he was very popular in the 30s and 40s. This was Stan Lee's favorite pulp magazine, The Spider. He was a big Spider fan from the first issue to how long, I don't know, but he read it for a long time. And the Spider was Richard Wentworth, a somewhat mentally unbalanced millionaire who decides to go on a crusade against criminals, the worst criminals of the 1930s. And, he's a very sharply drawn character in that he has a strong psychological personality. He's clearly bipolar. He has a messiah complex. He may be schizophrenic.
Wow.
I don't know, but as described by the original writer Norval Page, he was way out there, and that's what fascinates me about him. He has a real girlfriend as opposed to a fakey Lois Lane, Margot Lane girlfriend. He has real relationships with people, and the stories are white hot, hence psychologically strongly motivated, but also extremely violent and over the top.
Now this, we get to read the description on the back of this one. Operator number 5 and G8. Where did they come from? Because they're entities that come from somewhere. They're not just sidekicks in this novel here.
Right. Well, all of those characters were published in the 1930s by Harry Steger's popular publications. The Spider was their top seller. G8 was probably their top seller. The Spider was close to it, and Operator 5 a distant third. G8 was a World War I intelligence ace, a flyer, and a spy for the United States. Operator 5 was James Christopher, a prototype of James Bond, an American James Bond, in a lot of ways, who worked for the United States Intelligence Service. Operator 5's challenge was every month to save the United States from invasion. It got old fast, but when it was good, it was real good. So when I licensed the Spider, I was asked to also include Operator 5 and G8, make it a crossover. And so I did this mega novel where all three of these characters finally meet the battle, two of the most violent villains they've ever faced. And I've just about to publish the sequel, Fury and Steel, where one of those villains returns for another engagement. And we're this time it's a few years later, it's 1941. And Nazi robots are rampaging in New York.
Oh, you gotta love a good Nazi robot.
Yep.
So
this is my zombie book. The one after that is my Nazi robot book.
So these are they're still licensable characters. I mean, none of these are people that have come.
Yeah, I have to license and pay royalties on these. Yeah.
Okay. I know there's a lot of characters from that era that have fallen in the public domain. How did they keep them from falling into public domain?
They keep up the trademarks. They keep up the copyrights for as long as they can. It runs out eventually. But trademarks, copyrights, and continuing to publish the original stories or new stories.
Well, that would be one way to do it. I just hadn't seen that much Spider out there.
There's a ton of Spider stuff that's been reprinted over the last 20 or 30 years. Most of it is published by small presses, but there've been some mass market stuff.
And that's all it takes, just to keep the use going.
Bain Books did two sets of 3 books. In other words, 2 volumes with 3 stories in each volume. This is probably 20 years ago now, maybe, or 12.
Now, being as involved in the pulp heroes as you are, you're no doubt way more intimately familiar than I am with the Wold-Newton theory or the universe.
Well, I'm aware of it. I don't find it particularly compelling from my own point of view. But it was Philip Jose Farmer's, conceit, and it's caught fire, and a lot of people really subscribe to it. I don't, but everybody has their own favorite breakfast, right?
Okay, yeah, that's true. And the only reason that I thought of it was the green meteorite that was mentioned on the back of the book here, in capital letters. And when I think of green meteorites, I think of one from a distant planet that exploded. And I didn't know if that was an allusion to that.
No. That I just needed a meteorite to create some cosmic zombies, and that's how I did it. And
it might as well be green. Now I might have had the books out of order here. This is another spider book, and I've noticed two things when I saw this cover here. One is his hair, and the other is his teeth, and it's definitely long in the tooth because I get an even better close up here with Fury and Steel.
Okay. Fury and Steel is a sequel to the Doom Legion. Scourge of the Scorpion is my next spider. I haven't written it yet, but we've got a cover.
Okay, well, let's go back to wrong direction, Howard. There we go. Fury and Steel.
Now, the spider wore many different disguises. He looked a lot like the Shadow, but he wore plastic vampire teeth, which are the spider's fangs. He sometimes wore this kind of mask or that kind of mask, and he wore a long, lank, black wig to disguise his hair because he was a millionaire with a millionaire's haircut, and he wore a slouch hat and a black cape and all that stuff. So he disguised himself. He disguised when he wore this kind of mask, he would also disguise his face so that he wouldn't be recognizable, and he did things to his nose and to his mouth. But he wore the vampire fangs and he wore the wig, and he affected a different posture, and that turns him into the spider.
Now, does he take out? You mentioned before that he might have, but he's a little bit crazy. He might have some bipolar issues. Does he take on a totally different personality when he puts on the costume, sort of like Mike Barron's The Badger?
No, I would say what he does is he just turns the volume up to 12.
And he's got that spider ring on over the glove, which is no mean feat in and of itself.
One of the things about Richard Wentworth is the spider for him was a state of mind. He didn't have to put on the outfit and the mask to be the spider. He just kind of flicked a switch in his head and he just went on the warpath.
Was there any sort of an inspiration for that character to become the spider? I mean, like the bat hitting the window or something like that, or is it just
there are several. They never made a big deal of his origin. In fact, in my second book, I've gone into it in a little more detail and added some developments. But originally, when Richard Wentworth was in college, his favorite teacher was being blackmailed. And Wentworth, even though he was a relatively young guy and, going to an Ivy League college, he just killed the guy and he left the mark of the spider on his forehead. And that was that for like maybe 10 years. And then when Prohibition gangster stuff started to take hold in New York City, he just remembered this being the spider and reactivated that identity.
He's technically a murderer. I mean,
you're breaking up again.
He's technically a murderer, isn't he?
Nope, can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Let's try it one more time here. Out and in. Okay. How about now?
Nope.
Still no. Doggone internet. Fortunately, we're almost wrapping up here. That sounded like it might have got a better connection.
Nope. No?
Darn. All right. You talk.
I'm going to take it over, and I'll talk, and maybe you'll be back, because you're coming and going without any rhyme or reason. But when you're back for a while. It's not breaking up in the middle of things. It just breaks up. Anyway, that's my next spider. And he takes on a villain who had his own magazine back in the 30s. So I'm having fun. I'll have fun with that when I start writing it. After that, maybe if we can get a contract together, I'm going to do another Tarzan on Mars.
Oh, very good. I'd love to see that. John Carter has always been one of my favorite characters.
John,
he was a
I
basis
can't
for
hear you,
Superman.
but let me say that John Carter was the first pulp hero I ever read. Edgar Rice Burroughs was the first pulp writer I ever read. And, life-changing as it is for many of us, when we discover these writers and these characters, it really sets our imagination on fire.
I completely agree. In fact, I was introduced to John Carter during a hospital stay. And while I was...
Well, I can't hear you, unfortunately.
Oh, no. Here, let's see if this is going to come through for me here. He was an inspiration for Superman. He came before Superman. Still no. All right, I think we might have to cut it. We'll just cut it.
You want to cut it?
Yeah, we might as well.
Okay, that's fine.
It's not coming back.
We try another time, but we're just not getting anywhere when I can't hear you.
I understand. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you, folks in the chat, and we will be back tomorrow night with somebody new. Talk to you later. Good night.
Thanks a lot.